Greetings and welcome back to Wednesday Witness, a call to social holiness. My name is Reverend Laura Kigweba James. I'm the Director of Grassroots Organizing at the General Board of Church and Society, and I'm your host today. We would love to know where you all are joining us from, so please feel free to drop your city, state, even country in the chat. We welcome you to this Wednesday Witness. So the Wednesday Witness is a mini-series designed to be a short, no more than 30-minute session to highlight current issues that we're working on at Church and Society and to equip you to take specific action to create change in your local communities. All these sessions are recorded and available for later viewing on our YouTube page at Church and Society. We encourage you during this time as you listen to share your questions in the chat or live via Facebook. If we have time, we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. And if you have further questions about this series, please email us at gbcs@umcjustice.org. That's gbcs@umcjustice.org. So on July 6th, we spoke about the realities of voting rights in the US and how voting rights is an intersectional issue. And we asked you to take action by preaching and teaching on voting rights in your local congregations, educating yourselves through the great votingrightslab.org website that surveys voting rights state by state, and to call your senator to protect the right to vote and the integrity of the vote to address racial inequities in the US democratic process. So today, in addition to voting rights, we're going to talk about urgent priorities that Congress can move on before they leave for break, and how we can continue to engage members of Congress during the August recess. The next few weeks are critical, and Congress has the ability to make a number of key funding decisions that will have a significant impact nationally and across the world. As United Methodists, we affirm that national budgets are moral documents. They are a testament to our national priorities. And may it be that budgets invest in the life-giving and life-sustaining priorities, indeed, the things that make for peace. As people of faith, this is the time to engage Congress so that their legislative decisions reflect a moral witness that is life-giving, that is life-sustaining, and that creates the peace, justice, and equity that we all deserve. So today I am joined by my incredible colleagues, the Deputy General Secretary, John Hill, and the Director of Economic Health and Gender Justice, Reverend Camille Henderson Edwards. I welcome you both to this Wednesday Witness. So John, I know that this first question goes to you. I know that there are a lot of moving parts when we talk about the federal budget. Can you give us more specifics on where we are in this process and how this process will impact our advocacy priorities?
Sure, thanks Laura, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. As Laura mentioned, this really is a crunch time for the US Congress. We have just this week and next before members head back to their states for the August district work period. So when we talk about the budget, when we talk about spending decisions, we can really break it into two different categories. The first track, sort of like two tracks of legislation. The first track is the annual spending bills that Congress must pass to keep the government operations and programs running. These are the appropriations bills. They have to pass those bills or at least some stopgap spending measure before the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th. So that's a deadline pretty quickly approaching. The House of Representatives is working to finish up all of its appropriations bills before the August recess, so both this week and next. And we're focused on ensuring that our priorities are reflected in those bills. As you noted, Laura, budgets are moral documents. They really should reflect, be a reflection of who and what we value. So along with my colleagues, Holly Metcalf and Levy Bautista and Quinn Wunderling up at the UN office, we're working on one of those bills, which is the State Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill. We want to make sure that those funding decisions really reflect our United Methodist position, which supports robust funding for multilateral efforts for peacekeeping, for health equity, and for climate finance. And so we're going to be sending out an action alert probably tomorrow to give you all an invitation to contact your representative on that. I'll note when we talk about climate, there is a great deal of frustration by the lack of progress on broader climate legislation, and I'll talk about that in 1 second. But here within this appropriations bill, we actually have a good chance of enacting an increase to climate finance assistance to support countries that are really facing the brunt of the climate crisis. So this is life-saving funding. We see daily, I mean, you can just turn on the news right now, the devastation faced by communities around the world. And the US climate finance is essential to meeting both our moral obligation, the US obligation under the Paris Agreement, and in rebuilding some US credibility in the ongoing global climate negotiations, the next round of which will happen in Egypt in November. So really important to build momentum into that conversation and show that the US is serious in meeting the US's commitments on climate finance. The House is poised to adopt pretty strong numbers for climate finance as well as for peacekeeping and health equity. So our work is to sort of build support for that and then turn to the Senate and make sure that they likewise pass strong funding. So that's the appropriation side. The other side of the budget that doesn't happen every year, but has certainly dominated the conversation this year is something called reconciliation. And so reconciliation is a budget process that makes changes to the mandatory programs as well as tax provisions. The benefit of this process, as many of you might know, is that unlike other legislation, it only requires a simple majority in the Senate to pass. So with an evenly divided Senate, reconciliation is being eyed as a way, and maybe the only way, to pass significant legislation on a number of priorities, from health to climate to poverty. So the upside is there's this expedited process, but that comes with some restrictions. So the bill has to be focused on spending or taxes. It really can't be about sweeping policy changes. And then when it comes, it can pass with a simple majority, but you still need a majority to pass it. And that's where folks have been stuck. The Senate leadership has been unable to get 50 Democrats on board with any particular provision. So the latest news is the Senate might move a kind of scaled back reconciliation bill just focused on health, and perhaps wait and see if there's sort of energy to do something separate on climate after the August break. And this is very frustrating. It certainly flies in the face of the realities we're seeing in communities around the world. But our job is to be a faithful witness and keep impressing upon the Senate that there is an urgency and they have a moral obligation to act. One of the lasting lessons from my brief time in the private sector as a lobbyist was when my then boss and mentor was working in a coalition. We were working with a broad group of folks, and he reminded us that the job of advocates is to tell Congress what they should do and why they should do it, and their job is to figure out the politics of how to get it done. Right, and that's always kind of stuck with me. And we're in one of those moments where the politicians have to figure out the politics, but we have to keep impressing upon them the moral urgency and to demonstrate a really breadth of public support for strong action. And like the parable of the persistent widow in Luke, to be tenacious and relentless as we request them to act. So it can be tiring, it can be frustrating, but we are asking you again to contact your senators in support of urgent action to address the climate crisis. So that's an update sort of on the overall state of play, a little bit about climate. And I know Camille has been much more involved in healthcare conversations. And I know, Laura, you have some questions on that.
Yeah, John, thank you so much for that overview and that reminder of this urgency to be the moral witness. And that is our role as faith communities and as faith leaders. So thank you so much for that. So my second question does go to you, Camille. So in light of the most recent Supreme Court decision on reproductive health, we know that funding for healthcare is one of the most significant actions that the Senate can take in the coming weeks. So in addition to funding, can you speak really to the matters of justice and equity in the healthcare system that we as people of faith want Congress to address?
Yeah, thanks, Laura, and thanks for convening this, and welcome to everyone who's joining. It's such a cool thing to see everyone joining on this side. So to this matter of justice and equity, I think that if we are to consider what is just and equitable in healthcare, I think that we really do have to ask ourselves the question of who we have collectively left behind, right? Who is living without certain provisions and resources. And so we know that our current reality is that there are still about 2.2 million people who need comprehensive healthcare, but don't have access to it. Which means that I think that our current work is to witness to the United States Supreme Court that even though we have come this far, right, we currently have provisions for healthcare, and we currently, have made ways over the years. Our witness is to let Congress know that there is still more road to travel, right? And so I think this is also reflected in our social principles, which affirms quality, affordable, comprehensive, accessible access to healthcare as a basic human right. And so we know that, to this end, we have mechanisms such as Medicaid, right, which is this public insurance program that provides healthcare coverage to low-income communities. But there are still 12 states that haven't adopted Medicaid expansion, most of which are in the South, which means that there are limitations around who is eligible for Medicaid, creating this Medicaid coverage gap. And so right now, as John has spoken to, Congress has the power to pass legislation that will close this gap. And so the work of justice in this sense is holding Congress accountable and reminding, our national leaders of their moral responsibility, somewhat to the sense of, no one is free until we are all free, right? That we need to ensure that the provisions and the resources that are made available for us are accessible by all of us. And so I think in addition to the work of justice, right, our work of pursuing equity requires that we look more deeply, right, into who this issue impacts the most. And in doing that, we have to open additional lenses of race, gender, and class, right, if we look at this concept of intersectionality. And so of the 2.2 million people living in the Medicaid coverage gap, 60% are people of color. And there are about 800,000 women of reproductive age within that gap. I think it's important to note those two sort of like pieces of data for two reasons. The first, we are currently in a maternal mortality crisis. So among developed countries, the United States has the highest rate of people dying of pregnancy-related complications, most of which are preventable. So the CDC reported that the US maternal mortality rate is at a rate of 23.8 deaths per 100,000 live births. So compared to other countries, right, this is nearly 3 times higher than that of France, right, which is the country with the next highest rate. They have a rate of 8.7. And within this, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from childbirth than white women. So the first reason, right, is the current condition, right, of healthcare for women, particularly for women of color. And then I think the second, we also have to lift up, right, the impact of the United States Supreme Court decision, the ruling on Dobbs v. Jackson, which put access to comprehensive reproductive health care at risk. And so when we look at the services, the resources, the provisions that Medicaid provides, Medicaid pays for more than 40% of US births and 60% of births to Black mothers. So this notion of attaining justice and equity requires that we do our due diligence in closing the Medicaid coverage gap.
Wow, Camille, thank you for stressing what justice and equity looks like specifically around healthcare and the impacts on communities of color, specifically Black women. Thank you both, Camille and John, for that overview. So y'all, we have heard the context. How are we going to respond? So we have tools on our website, umcjustice.org, the Civic Engagement Toolkit that can show you and guide you of how to call your member of Congress, how to write, arrange a visit, so that we can have these important, significant conversations that center life-sustaining ways that funding and legislation can lead to justice and equity for all. There are specific actions on our website around climate that John mentioned that impacts not only nationally, but globally justice, as well as closing the Medicaid coverage gap. I believe Larry will be dropping those links in the chat for you all. So Camille, I do want to turn it back to you about speaking to the process of these action alerts. How do they work? When we click on the website, what happens? Can you share with us more about that?
Yeah, so we have this system, we have the action alerts that are sent out to you all. And in the action alert, we'll have information about what is the current context, right? What's happening. And your activity, right? Going to the website, clicking, filling in your information, personalizing your message to your member of Congress, whether that be a representative or a senator, you putting in your information, clicking and sending it to your member of Congress, that is then sent to the member's office. The staff is able to receive this letter, right, that's put in the message at the end of each action alert. And you're able to express your concerns about a particular issue, right? So if that is, we have several action alerts around addressing, Congress's ability to close the Medicaid coverage gap. We have additional action alerts coming up soon about how to respond and making sure that we have comprehensive reproductive health care. So you sending that action alert lets your representative know that you are concerned about this particular issue, especially as their constituent. You as a constituent and your representative are in relationship, and being able to, one, effectively communicate those things that are happening to you, and those things that are part of your lived experiences. We also have this responsibility to advocate on things that we are observing, right? So for example, even though you may be one who is insured, right? And you do have access to healthcare, we know, right, that there is this issue of justice and equity where others do not. And so being able to voice your concern and to voice your advocacy to your member of Congress through that action alert, that letter is then sent to their office for them to be made aware. And we also know that there's power in numbers, right? And so I'm not sure, John, if you are going to speak to this, so I might be, releasing, but so we have just been in conversation, right, that we have about 10,000 letters, right, that have been sent to our congressional offices. So that means that we have representation in that large capacity so that our representatives and senators know that we are concerned and we are doing something. We are keeping our finger on the pulse of these issues. And then lastly, I would really like to say, I've been thinking about this notion of, why the importance of like being involved in this way, right? Of clicking the button, of filling out the information. And I was thinking of, I'm a pastor at heart, so I was thinking of the biblical text and how in like Paul's words, right, in the book of Romans, there's this question that he asks. He's like, how is one able to hear without someone to proclaim, right? And in that context, he was talking about spreading the gospel. And I think in a similar way, we have this responsibility to proclaim and to give witness. And our action alerts and being able to participate in that realm is a direct way to do that.
Amen. Yes, amen right here. That our responsibility to proclaim. Thank you so much, Camille, for that reminder and that invitation. So as United Methodists through Church and Society, as Camille shared, there have been over 10,000 messages shared with Congress. Yes, congratulations, but we are not done. There's still so much more to do. So even after these last few weeks of critical actions, members of Congress still need to hear from us. when they return back to their local districts. And it's important for us to reach out and to get loud, as my fellow organizers always remind me, when our members of Congress return back to their districts. So in that same civic engagement toolkit, I saw this in the chat, how do we reach out to members in red states? You reach out to them, as Camille said, it is a responsibility to proclaim so that they can hear. So in that civic engagement toolkit, we have how-to tools of how to write, to call, to set up visits in virtual as well as in person, in district, and to host prayer vigils and action. So I encourage you all to be creative and intentional about how you want to communicate your values, your story, and your witness for justice with your members of Congress now and throughout the month of August. So I want you all to drop in the chat. How do you plan to reach out to your members of Congress? Are you going to take actions through action alerts? Are you going to write? Are you going to call, visit, vigil? I understand that the chat is now open. So please let us know, how are you going to take action? And yes, I think that is it. I didn't see any other questions. Oh, there's just a question that popped up. And don't forget to write op-eds. Thank you so much, Joyce. Yes, there is a how-to in the Civic Engagement Toolkit of how to write op-eds. It's so important. Yes, thank you so much. Anyone else? I see you right. How else are people going to get involved? Are you going to be taking actions? Are you going to be writing, calling? Please let us know. Okay. I see an O. Joyce, I believe that's an op-ed. Okay. Oh, hi, Jerome. Oh, yes, it's so good. Okay, awesome. Thank you all. Yes, I'll see a lot of op-eds. You're going to visit your rep's office. Very important. Thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you so much for participating in today's Wednesday Witness. Today's recording, as well as July 6th, will be available on the Church and Society's YouTube page, and we will be back soon with more Wednesday Witness moments. Thank you all, and we'll talk soon. And thank you again, Camille and John. Take care.